Mic check 1 2, mic check 1 2. As you can see, we've got ourselves a slightly more professional setup here. Uh, all for your viewing and listening pleasure, trying to stimulate those auditory senses, of course. Something I've noticed is that when I start these videos, I feel somewhat compelled to give a really overly enthusiastic intro, like, what up, everybody? You're back. And it's like, I don't want to do that shit. I definitely don't want to do a pseudo American accent either. I think probably just because everybody else you watch on YouTube does that shit, I feel almost as if I'm letting you guys down. But at the end of the day, there's only like two people watching this. So, you know what I mean? These nuts. And but listen, hopefully you can hear me sound completely unenthusiastic in better audio quality now. So how about that? The other thing that I've noticed as I'm watching this back is that I have a habit of trying to make one point and then going off on another point and never actually revisiting. And so because you guys aren't inside my head, you actually never find out the point I was ever about to make because I only make it like 90%. Like, you know what I mean? It's like you go to see your mate and then you get to the door and then just about before you're about to knock, you go think, I need to go see that other mate. And then next thing you know, like you haven't seen none of your mates because you never actually finished off the point. So we're going to try and be a little bit more concise with this. I did try and make some notes as well, and then that all ended up taking too long. So bollocks, man. It is the point I'm trying to make. We're just going to go off the dome like we did every other video. And if you like it, like and subscribe and share it with your buddies and all this good stuff, right? And if you don't, nobody gives a rat's ass. So Eubank versus Smith, really good British level. Okay, let me phrase this correctly. Really good British dust up on virtue of the fact that both guys are British, but that's not to say that they're necessarily British level. These are two world level guys. Liam Smith, who's been a legitimate world champion in name, right? And Chris Eubank Jr., who has not, because we don't count the IBO title, that's a bag of shit, right? But in name, Liam Smith has been a legitimate world champion, albeit he won a vacant title against Apollo Thompson. I don't know who that is. Maybe his dad liked the Rocky movies or something. He was like, here you go, boy. You're gonna be a boxer now. But yeah, that guy, I don't know who he was. You know, he's probably working at a car wash right now. And so both guys have been at world level, but I wouldn't say neither of them have been like legitimate world champions, right? And so it's an interesting fight, and we're gonna get into some of the. All right, so we're gonna try and be more structured about this, right? We're gonna talk about the gloves are off first, and who won the psychological battle with the one-liners and all that kind of stuff within the debate, as if we're like analyzing prime minister's questions or something. Then we're going to get into the analysis of the fight, and we're going to talk about the tangible aspects of it and the intangible aspects of it. And then we're going to get into some predictions on which way it goes and, you know, what could be in line for the future for each fighter. So first things first, gloves are off, you know, good production as always. I felt like Johnny did his thing, but I don't know what you guys thought, put something in the comments, but I felt like Johnny didn't really get involved so much this time. They were like happy to just go at it amongst themselves. Um, First observation that I want to make is that Chris Eubank he's a cool cat, you know, and he's an entertaining character. And I think he's kind of found himself a bit more now. I actually like, I don't feel cringy watching Chris Eubank Jr. I actually enjoy watching him speak now. And the reason is that when he first came into this boxing thing, yeah, he was this really weird, insecure, deluded guy. Like he used to come out with these ridiculous predictions about, you know, and then his dad would be there, make it, gassing him up as well, talking about how he's gonna stop Billy Joe Saunders in 6 rounds, all of this fucking bullshit, right? And he was fighting nobodies. He was fighting like some Scandinavian or some Slovakian that had just come in for, you know, a big like construction job with some plaster and some tiling, and then he was going to fight Chris Eubank Jr. on the weekend, right? And so that deluded Chris Eubank isn't there anymore. He's calm, he's collected. I feel like he lives in the real world, and you know, it's good to hear that he's excited and it feels like he made the point that he's 33. His dad retired at 32, but he's still not had his peak. He's still got the best of his boxing career to go. He can fight for another 4 or 5 years. But we need to see it in the ring, not obviously not due to his own fault. We haven't seen him very recently. He was supposed to fight Conor Benn, and then that whole PED situation kicked off. But he's still been very inactive as a fighter. And but in terms of what comes out of his mouth, you kind of feel like, okay, he's living in the real world. There's something going on upstairs, right? So I feel like that's good to see. And I think that as a fighter, the more you live in the real world, as opposed to living like some Audley Harrison level of delusion, you're going to probably get the best out of yourself. He also seems happy. He just seems like a genuinely happy guy, right? I don't know, maybe that's the confidence from, his trip to Turkey, which we're going to get into, with the fake beard and the hairline rejuvenation, all that kind of stuff. But he seems like a happy, centered, real world fighter, right? Which I think for the vast majority of Chris Eubank Jr.'s career, we haven't really seen. From Liam Smith's perspective, Liam Smith was Liam Smith, right? And I felt like Liam did a good job pointing out some of the bullshit that Eubank comes out with about the whole 157. You're supposed to make 157 for Conor Benn, and he posted how gaunt he looked, but he actually only made 159, even though that fight didn't go ahead. So he also did a good job bringing up the whole, were you disappointed because that was a risk reward fight, right? You was fighting a smaller man for a lot of money. Is that why you're disappointed? Because he's essentially making the point that he's now coming into a much higher risk fight for a much lower reward. I'm sure Eubank's getting paid well, but he ain't getting paid that Conor Benn money, right? So he's trying to sow the seeds of doubt in Eubank's head that, hey, is that why you're disappointed? Are you struggling for motivation in this fight? Because you're up against a real dog who's been there at world level, who's not some guy that you're just fighting because of the history of your dad and his dad, right? And you're not getting paid as much money either. So I felt like that was a good avenue to pursue. There was a couple of jabs about the Roy Jones thing as well, which I'm going to come into later on. I felt like Eubank did a good job just trying to dismiss him and do what he does and say he could beat him at 50% and all this kind of nonsense. And, you're a tough game fighter, but it's not going to be good enough. And Eubank tried to score some points about the fact that Smith has been stopped before, but at the end of the day, Smith has got stopped in a body shot in the 10th round against Canelo, right? In a fight where he was holding his own, not to make excuses for him. I don't know whether the situation would have been too different, but I think there's a chance that Smith could have made the 12th round as well if it wasn't for the fact that he came in with no sparring. Like, if anyone watched that fight, if you didn't go back and watch it, Smith came into the fight with a massive cut above his eye, which he had picked up 4 weeks prior in sparring. So he had no sparring coming into the fight, right? So if it's hard enough coming in against Canelo, right? But if you come in with a cut above your eye and you've had no sparring, because if it gets worse, then you might have to pull out the fight. You're not exactly giving yourself every advantage. So, but the point is, Eubank was alluding to the fact that he's never been stopped and Smith has. So Smith was pointing to the fact that, hey, I hurt you to the body when we were sparring. Who knows about all that kind of stuff? But I felt like you would have to say, with his smooth, relaxed, humorous style, Eubank obviously pointing out the fact that Liam Smith's very angry. You come across an angry character and he sort of conceded that. I felt like the psychological battle, whatever weight you put into those things, Eubank probably came out on top. But then we get into the question of how much does that really matter in the ring. So if we just look at it from a purely boxing point of view, right, let's look at some of the tangibles and we'll get into the intangibles. I think the tangibles are that both guys have fought at similar levels. And this might come down to the old cliche of a good big man beats a good small man. And it's not just about the fact that Eubank has always campaigned at 160 and no lower than 160, and Smith has campaigned the majority, if not all of his career at 154, won his world title, a vacant title at that at 154, has fought a couple of, stay busy non-title fights at 160, but never really competed at any competitive level there. That's a massive advantage for Eubank, and not just in terms of his own dimensions, right? But it's also the fact that he's used to getting in the ring with bigger men, right? So it's not necessarily about what you can dish out, it's about what you can take. And mention was made in the back and forth about Eubank's inherited his chin from his dad. right? I disagree with Eubank though, where he said he's never been dropped. I felt like George Groves dropped him twice. Neither were given. I was at that fight. He got dropped twice. The referee just didn't give him. But anyway, as a side point, um, Eubank has got a strong chin, right? That's not to say that Smith hasn't. He's never been dropped by a headshot either. But it's just going to be a big advantage for Eubank having taken bigger shots from bigger men. And not just at 160, but even at 168, Chris Eubank joined the Super 6 tournament. And I don't think it was the Super 6, it was the World Boxing Super Series bullshit tournament. That I think that's probably when he first started working with Callis Howland. And he obviously stopped Avni Yildirim, lost a decision to George Groves in the semi-final, but he came back and beat James DeGale, albeit it was a completely washed James DeGale. He still got in there with a much bigger man and held them shots. So that's going to be a big advantage for him. I think the advantage for Liam Smith on the tangible point of view is that he's got much, I think, more reliable boxing fundamentals, right? The thing that we don't really know about Chris Eubank is how is he going to fight? He came into the fight, and I suppose we're starting to transition into the intangibles here to an extent. But okay, let me hold that. I think to finish off on the tangible aspects, what has Chris got? If we assume that he's going to fight in the Roy Jones style, he's got a very sharp jab. We saw that against Liam Williams, dropping him 3 times with the jab, albeit questions around Liam Williams. He got stopped in his next fight, clearly suffering some kind of neurological issue for a while with like the way he rolls his eyes and what have you. People that are familiar with Liam Smith will know that. But he still dropped a grown man with a jab 3 times. So he has got a sharp jab, jab, stroke, left hook, in that Roy Jones style. And so the speed is probably in Chris Eubank's favor. He doesn't really throw combinations anymore, especially if he's going to be fighting in that Jones style, whereas Smith has probably got the benefit from a stylistic point of view of being able to keep that high guard, try and break fighters down slowly, and then when you get into the latter rounds, Smith is able to throw punches and bunches a little bit better than Eubank at this stage, right? Obviously, old school Eubank, not necessarily the case. When Eubank was just letting his hands go and he didn't really have a style, he was just brawling, right? You'd probably give Eubank the advantage. But so I would say in terms of being able to do damage to the body, I would say Smith is definitely holding an advantage there. He's the more structured and disciplined body puncher. He's able to mix it up to the body and the head, and he's able to go up the gears as the rounds go on. But for Eubank, it's going to be the jab, it's going to be the movement as well. Smith, let's be honest, he doesn't have fantastic footwork. He's a very flat-footed fighter. That's not the same as being able to have intelligent footwork. It's just not very quick footwork, right? He can get himself in the pocket, right, to let those shots go, but can he move guys around and get in and outside the pocket and take time out, when he wants to rest or recuperate? No, not necessarily, right? So I suppose there's a lot less in his tool bag in terms of his footwork, but that's not to say that he doesn't have footwork from an offensive point of view, but just not so much from a defensive point of view. So if we look at the intangibles, for the non-boxing purists, it's probably a little bit more interesting.